All right, everyone, this is Nathan Lindorf with Rational Independent. We are mixing it up today. I'm trying out a new feature. We're calling this the Breakdown. And this is where we take a clip from a popular podcast or a YouTube video, particularly as it discusses something with political and cultural commentary. And we identify conversational tricks and rhetorical tactics that the left often uses to make their points in a political conversation that are very difficult to spot when you're in the moment. But if we take a conversation and we break it down, we can show some of the things that are being done that you otherwise might not notice. The goal, as always, is to improve our ability to reason through our own positions, to articulate those positions to other people, and to encourage other people to articulate their own deeply held positions as well, and then to do our best to advocate for our thoughts and our opinions and our beliefs, and by so doing, participate in the marketplace of ideas and help to improve the quality of our civil society. Because the simple truth is, if we lose the ability to articulate and debate political positions, then we will lose our civil society and descend into violence. Most of the videos that I've culled so far come from the PBD podcast, Patrick Bet-David. He runs Valuetainment, very successful businessman in insurance, runs a great broadcast company, modern media company. He hires a bunch of talent. He's building a brand. He's very methodical in what he does. I like the way that he thinks. I like the way that he speaks. He's politically fairly independent. He kind of is in that Joe Rogan space as far as he is able to attract guests from all sides of the political issues that are at play in our society, which is a rare talent. Most of the time you get people who are siloed. Maybe they're a little too harsh, or maybe they're a little too ideologically bound themselves. But it's all too often that true, deep leftist thinkers don't want to come on anything but friendly territory. And somehow he's able to get these leftist guests, and he's able to give them a chance to speak their piece. Now, he doesn't necessarily agree with them. He pushes back. It's not a softball interview, but he allows them to make their point, and he lets it stand. And it's a dynamic that works. So we're going to dig into this. We'll be looking at both left and right. But in my experience, these tricks will come up most often for people on the left, partly because it's a leftist principle to not be principle-based. In other words, if you look at the left as people who are pushing for authoritarian centralized government, which is, broadly speaking, how I view it, then you're going to see people who are power-centered, not principle-centered. You're going to see people who believe the ends justify the means. So rather than, as an example, a conversation I was listening to earlier, rather than the principle of private property being important, they'll make the case or the argument that says, hey, listen, if the end effect of a 100% tax rate is better than what you would get if you owned your own, all of your income and you were taxed to 0%, wouldn't you rather have it that way? Would you be willing to accept centralized government power if it gave you what you wanted, or maybe even more than you could get from your income? Would you accept a 100% tax rate? And that's an argument that comes from the perspective of, we don't really care about the principle of private property, personal stewardship, the right of a citizen to try something and fail, to make foolish choices with their money. All of these things are part of a free society. And they're trying to instead say those principles are not as important as the end of a utopian society where you get everything you want through government intervention. So wouldn't you rather have that? Wouldn't you rather have that end? And we can just kind of gloss over the means of how we get there. That's a common conversational tactic. And that's the difference, I think, between the left and the right. So the conversation for today is between PBD and Neil deGrasse Tyson. So many three-name people, but we'll make it work. This is a recent conversation from 7 months ago. They are discussing the COVID vaccines in general, but it gets a little heated, and it's primarily about the COVID vaccine. New technology, doing my best. We're going to see how this goes.
From what we knew at the beginning of COVID to what we know today, what do we know about the vaccine today that we didn't know while we were all testing it in America, taking it? What have we learned now?
What do you mean testing it?
So this is my fourth listen to this, and I actually missed a layer here, but we all learn. So Patrick Bet-David, his initial position is he's saying, what have we learned about the COVID vaccine now that we didn't know when we chose to roll it out in a rush during the height of the pandemic? That is a really good conversational prompt. It's a great interview question because it gives a chance for his guest to, in a very broad way, discuss whatever's most important to him and riff on things and go ahead, go after it. Great interview question. However, you'll notice, and this is something that happens more than you might think, but it does happen. Sometimes if you're in a position where you're debating with a leftist, they are not interested in answering the question you ask. Instead, they'll look for a misstatement or they'll look for some form of a rhetorical advantage where they think they can jump on it and gain an advantage in the conversation. In this instance, Neil deGrasse Tyson jumps on the idea that Patrick Bet-David is saying where we were testing it while we were taking it.
On America, there were tests before it was released.
9 months is not a long time to test.
No, but it was tested.
Yeah, but 9 months, the average is 30. The average is 5 to 10 years. I mean, 9 months is not enough.
Okay, so you have to say,
test.
no, you have to ask.
To articulate what we're talking about, Neil deGrasse Tyson immediately responds with, "Oh, we tested it." In other words, he's responding as if PBD had said, "We didn't test it." Fair. Miscommunication. Perhaps we misunderstood. PBD jumps in and says, no, I'm talking my concern. Again, he's arguing in good faith, I would say, and he's trying to clarify what he sees as a miscommunication. And this is often the case where when left and right speak, the left presents confusion or presents, they ascribe to you a position you didn't take. And when the right hears that and understands that, they say, oh, that's not my position, which means you must have misunderstood me. So let me clarify. Except if the left is not arguing in good faith, they understood your position. They just either don't agree with it, they think it's dangerous, or they want to shut you down in some way. Hence the deployment of rhetorical tricks.
Hold on. It was tested in trials, okay? By the way, I'm not claiming to be the expert on all of this. I read all the same things you have, but I'm a scientist, so I read it as a scientist, okay?
This, first off, Neil deGrasse Tyson is no dummy, but this is a very clever rhetorical trick that he just employed, if you paid attention. Here's what he just did. He said, first, at the beginning of this debate, okay, that we're carving out, this adversarial conversation, I'm going to give myself proactively a place to retreat to. If this conversation goes badly, if I lose this conversation, I have a place to retreat to because I just said, this isn't my specialty. This isn't what my area of focus has been. So he's not undermining his own credibility. He even sounds a little humble. Again, he's a gifted communicator. But rhetorically, what he's done is he's given himself a place to retreat to. If it goes badly, he can say, listen, perhaps I misspoke. This isn't my area of expertise. And he can undercut the damage to his reputation because after all, this isn't his area of expertise. But in the same breath, he says, but I'm a scientist, so I interact with this topic as a scientist, which is an appeal to authority. It's a logical fallacy that says, you should believe me because I'm an expert. So he has simultaneously claimed expertise and a lack of expertise in the same sentence. That is a brilliant condensed way to both give him something that he can bludgeon his opponent with compared to PBD, who's a layman, a businessman. I'm a scientist, so I have more expertise than you, therefore trust my authority. But in case I lose, I'm not really an authority. Very clever. 10 out of 10.
Okay? They were trials. That's what the point of phase 1, 2, 3 trials are all about. They are tested enough to get data on how to then advise the larger population. Yes, it was tested. For you to say it wasn't tested is a gap between.
He's now directly ascribing to PBD a position he didn't take. At no point did PBD make the position and say, we didn't even bother testing COVID. We didn't even bother testing the vaccine. We just rolled it out irresponsibly. No, he even clarified his initial statement because he kind of used a shorthand reference, and then he offered more clarification. He said, my concern is that we did not deploy long-term tests. The average in the medical industry for a new vaccine from beginning of development to deployment in the broad population is 5 to 10 years. PBD is absolutely right on that. That is the average, historically speaking, for other vaccines. That is not even close to the timeline that was done here. It was deployed and tested and released rapidly. Essentially, societal compromise was reached in which we said, enough testing, roll it out. The long-term testing will just have to happen naturally as we've rolled this out in the population. In other words, he's saying we're doing long-term testing concurrently with deploying it in the population. That's the factual position that PBD said. But Neil deGrasse Tyson has now ascribed to him the position that PBD says there was no testing.
Between your awareness and understanding how things work and what actually happened. It was tested. If you want it to be tested on millions of people instead of thousands, you can put in for that.
Here's another position. Maybe your concern is the sample size wasn't big enough. Maybe your concern was you think it should be millions instead of thousands in these studies. Again, I hate to belabor the point. That's not what he said. That's not his opponent's position. This is gaslighting, straight and simple. It's a very effective rhetorical trick because it forces the other person to either continually defend and clarify and explain, or it forces them to defend a position they don't even hold, or it makes the other person feel crazy at the end of the conversation if they're not good at keeping track of, in abstract, what's my position, what did I say, if they're not very disciplined in their speech, etc. It could really twist you up. It's a sign that you're not arguing in good faith.
You can say, I don't want this unless it's millions. That's okay.
Totally fine with me.
Okay.
I'm okay with that.
That's fine. So based on that, do you say, let's keep testing it while the virus keeps spreading? Okay? Right. So this is the contest between the information you have available to you at that moment and what's going on outside the lab.
Now, he's very smarmy right here, and makes me want to. I would not react calmly if someone was to treat me this way. Why does he get away with it? I would argue he gets away with it because he's arguing from a position of authority. Here, I'm a scientist. I'm trained in these matters. I have expertise in this area. Let me explain to you how this works. Let me teach you how to do a cost-benefit analysis. He says to the successful insurance businessman, pretty sure PBD knows how to do cost-benefit analysis among populations. It's almost like he made a lot of money doing that. Anyway, let's see where it goes.
People are dying. Hospitals are becoming overloaded. So, do you say we have good data on the 1,000? It's not yet at 1 million in case you wanted 1 million.
And again, let's reiterate, because that's your position. You wanted 1 million, even though that's nothing PBD said at all, not even close.
Are you going to say, let's still do it let's wait another 6 months so we get another 1 million in here? Will you do that as a public health professional?
No,
This is important. I'm going to pause right here because it's easy to miss, but he says it. It's real because he's going to shift in a second. He's positing this hypothetical specifically, explicitly from the position of, is that the decision you would make as a public health professional? In other words, assume that you are some kind of epidemiologist with the CDC overseeing the deployment of the testing and deployment of these drugs as a matter of public policy. In other words, implicating state action, government action. Is that the cost-benefit analysis you would make?
I would have said, allow the individual to still have a choice that's okay with 1,000 instead of a few million. Leave the person have the choice.
And that's the key. Oftentimes in conversations, sometimes, and credit to PBD, and in a way to Neil deGrasse Tyson, when you're having an argument with someone in good faith that does not agree with you, the most important thing you can do is, as quickly as possible, particularly, hopefully, before tempers get flared, try and identify the core disagreement. Where is the root of the issue? If you argue about all these branching ideas, you can yell at each other for hours and get nowhere. You know, think about this. If you have a couple that's been married 20 years, they might have an argument that covers kids and laundry and the budget and your mother-in-law and your snoring and whatever. And if you really boil down to, maybe it's, hey, since you took that new job and you've been out of town more, I don't feel as supported at home and it's wearing me down. And I'm worried I'm not gonna be able to take care of the kids without your support. That's a productive conversation that you can have. That's something that you can negotiate on and come to a conclusion and a decision that works for both of you. But if you spend all your time arguing about your tangential issues, you'll never get to that core. So credit to them in this conversation. They reached this core disagreement in less than 2 minutes from the start of the clip. Good for them. Here's the core disagreement. All of the scientific principle is fine. And they, by and large, if you look at it objectively, they're in agreement. Okay. No one is saying we should not have responsible scientific inquiry, discovery, deployment of all these amazing drugs, all of the reasons why it can help in a crisis. No one wants millions of people to die. None of that. Here's the core of it. One party believes that the individual should be able to voluntarily and should have the responsibility to make their own risk assessment for themselves and their family and make the choice about the vaccine based on their own personal choice. The other side says, generally you can do that, but in this case, if you make a decision we don't like, we're gonna force you to make the right decision. And the right decision is our decision. We're gonna override your personal choice. So here we are at this core. Now, people arguing in good faith, once they identify that core issue, we'll then discuss whether or not that core issue can be managed, whether or not that can be adapted or changed. That's what the conversation becomes about. If you're arguing with someone who's not talking in good faith, who's more interested in winning the conversation than they are in than finding true common ground or resolving a deep issue, they are going to try and use rhetorical tricks to skate around that issue, to argue a different position, either take a different position themselves or ascribe a different position to you or straight up gaslight you or 1,001 other ways. So let's see where these things go from here. PBD initially said, what do we know now that we didn't know then? Neil deGrasse Tyson said, let's talk about this imaginary concern that you think we didn't test it and that you would only be comfortable if we tested it with millions of people before deploying it to the public. PBD clarifies and says, that's not my concern. My concern is we didn't do long-term testing, and that raises questions for me. And I'm concerned that even without that long-term testing, the government still employed measures of force to override individual bodily autonomy. Let's see what Neil deGrasse Tyson says.
Not force him to take it or else you're going to get out of the Marines, and you've been doing this for 14 years. Not force him to take it or else you have to quit your job as a nurse.
There's a public
it's
health
force versus
there's a
choice.
There's a public health contract that you have signed implicitly as a citizen of a country where...
This is very important because this is something that people who argue based on power as opposed to principle, they will appeal to your ideals. They will appeal to principles that you espouse because people don't want to feel like a hypocrite. They don't want to feel like they have a lack of integrity. And so they will ascribe to you and say, if you don't agree with my position, it's because you have a lack of integrity. It's because you're a hypocrite. So what he just did is he said, if you don't agree that the government should mandate vaccines, then you aren't a patriot. then you aren't a responsible citizen. Then you lack integrity or compassion for your fellow men. You must be selfish and blinded and, apply all the aspersions you like. That's the argument that he responds to. That is a low down dirty trick. But he's clever because he doesn't say it right out. But if you think through the emotion of what he's presenting, that's what he's presenting.
In part, we depend on each other for health, our wealth, our security, and the like. And that contract is, in the best scientific evidence available at the time, if you do not get vaccinated, you will put other people in this organization at risk, and that organization does not want to take that risk. So you do not have this job anymore if you decline it.
Notice, I brought this up earlier. Notice, he started by saying, is this the decision you make as a public health administrator? But that's where it implicates force. PBD mentions force is my concern, government mandated force. Neil deGrasse Tyson responds with, the business you work for might make the choice to not have the risk of having you as an employee if you don't take the vaccine. So they might fire you for that. That's not what happened. What happened is the government mandated that businesses enforce this. The government was the driving factor to mandate vaccination adoption by employees. That's government force, but that's not what Neil deGrasse Tyson says. He's created a straw man where he says, well, it's totally reasonable for a private market actor to decide in their own risk analysis to not have you as an employee if you won't get vaccinated. But that is just gaslighting. That's not what's driving both the concern that he's overtly stated or the historical record of what actually happened.
So, with any public health decision, there has to be a consequence to you not participating in that social contract. Is it your job? In some cases, it was. But no, we're not going to have the army bust into your home and force a needle into your shoulder.
I think it was pretty close to that.
That's not going to happen.
We pretty much did that.
Well, only put your job at risk, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, just your job. Just the way you feed your family. Just your livelihood. It's not like that's important to people's emotional health. It's not like, men commit suicide when they're unable to feed their families. That never happens. No, it's just your job. Sickening.
67% of Americans took the COVID. That's force. That's not a choice. That's a lot of force and coercing and pushing going on. But you can't go to the school unless you're vaccinated against mumps. I think that's bullshit.
That's a different country.
Yeah, but
okay, what you want a country?
No, America is supposed to be the one that offers the most freedom. That's what America is supposed to be.
Okay, so watch.
So for example, if you use that argument, somebody may say, well, freedom of choice, I want to choose what I want to do with the body. You're right.
What body?
If you want to get an abortion, it's your choice.
Your own body.
If you want to get an abortion, get an abortion.
You notice how he was looking to jump in? And he was like, oh, what body? What body? I think he saw a line of attack depending on what he meant by that, and he was wanting him to clarify so he could jump on it. Not that he wanted to listen to what Neil deGrasse Tyson was saying, not what PBD was saying, or listen to the rationale behind his well thought out and articulated position, but find a rhetorical misstatement or something that he can do to undermine it.
If I want to get the vaccine, I get to choose. So you can't force, if I can't force you to get an abortion, you shouldn't be able to force me to get
Because it's not about you.
It's interesting that people on the left will appeal the principle when convenient for them, my body, my choice, when it comes to their preferred position of abortion, saying that you should not, as the government, have the power to mandate a medical procedure on a particular individual. As a citizen, they have the right to make that choice for their own body. But the moment that principle becomes inconvenient and people who don't want a vaccine says, my body, my choice. That principle's out the door. Now, you have to do it. You have to do it. My body, my choice doesn't apply.
It's about people you interact with, and that's the social contract of public health.
We don't even know if the vaccine worked or not at the time.
Yes, that's what the trials are, dude. That's why these trials. Are you missing data out there?
But let me ask you a question. Are we saying only one type of scientists are right?
No, we're saying that the system in place.
The 16,000 that signed that.
No. The system in place to test vaccines.
Yeah.
There's an entire system that's in place. That with review boards and all of it.
And the average.
That's in place. Now what you can say is, I have a better idea than all these review boards and all these agencies and the CDC. I have a better idea. Here's what you should do. And that would have made everything better.
Once again, and that we're going to unpack this a little bit and we're going to wrap it up here. But once again, Neil deGrasse Tyson is ascribing a position to PBD that he did not take. He's saying, you can choose to abandon the scientific method if you want and offer something totally different. But that means that, okay, so there's layers here. Just got to unpack it a little bit. All right. Right at the very beginning, Patrick Bet-David made the statement that said, basically, because of the emergency, we did short-term testing and then we deployed it to people, contrary to the standard medical practice for vaccine deployment. We shortened the testing period and basically said, okay, we're going to do the long-term testing concurrent with deployment, but we're going to go ahead because of the crisis and roll it out now. And Patrick Bet-David said, let's have a conversation about what we might have learned from the fact that we rolled this out without doing the long-term testing. Neil deGrasse Tyson, said, due to the emergency, we had to roll it out. Okay. What that means is he's claiming that the crisis caused a shortening of the review period, caused a change in the deployment schedule. He argued that that was a good and valid reason to do that. That's an acceptable thing to say. That's totally reasonable. Sometimes in emergency, you don't have the luxury of doing all of the steps in your process. Sometimes you have to jump right to the conclusion, okay? But less than 5 minutes later, he's now making the case that if you don't agree with the forced deployment of a vaccine to the broad population that has not undergone long-term testing, that you want to abandon the scientific method and the systems that support that scientific method, the review boards, the peer review process, the publishing schedule, the CDC, all of these institutional protections that enable us to roll out consistently good scientific products, that his own position, Neil deGrasse Tyson's position, is that we skipped a lot of that because of the crisis. And then now he's turning around and saying, if you don't agree with us skipping it, you must want to abolish the scientific establishment and come up with something new. In other words, if you really look at it, he is taking Patrick Bet-David's position that the scientific method is good, but that because of a crisis, we skipped the long-term testing and did it concurrent with deployment. That's PBD's initial position. He's taking that and now making it his and forcing Patrick Bet-David to try and defend the position that's not his position, defend the position that if he doesn't agree with Neil deGrasse Tyson, he must be someone who believes in magical thinking and unicorn farts and not the scientific method. We are 5 minutes into a 25-minute video. I like these. This is kind of fun. Hopefully the audio worked this time. And if you like it, let me know and we'll do some more of these. But at the end of the day, I think this kind of analysis is important. So let me know what you think in the comments. This has been The Breakdown with The Rational Independent. Good luck out there.